I am originally from Ohio, and I actually was born in 1961. And in the 70s, when I graduated, back then, if you were a woman in the Midwest, you were expected to do one of three things. You were expected to either get married, which is what most people did, or if you were going to go to college, then you were expected to either be a teacher or a nurse. And so I was being a good Midwestern girl, and I thought, okay, I will go to college to become a teacher. And so, I really didn't know anything about teaching, but I thought, I like kids. And so I start at University of Dayton, near where I grew up, and also was dating somebody thinking, oh, I'll be a teacher, get married, I'll do the thing. And after I got into student teaching, I did one semester of student teaching, and I really, honestly, I went home and I was crying. I just thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because I can't do this. Like, this was not who I think I was meant to be. And so as I really struggled with it, and I had a really strong faith then as well, I was praying about it. I was talking to my best friend's mom, who was also a really strong Christian, and who was the HR director at a bank in Dayton. And so she's coaching me, saying, well, look, you can actually get a career in business. And I honestly, I didn't know really what that meant. I was like, okay. And so I switched to business. Ultimately, she got me a job in the bank, and it was Third National Bank of Dayton, Ohio. Not first, not second, it was Third National Bank of Dayton, Ohio. And I worked in the trust department. And most of you guys probably have no idea what that is. Today, there aren't very many trust departments. Mostly it's the investment management business, and they split all of those pieces up. But my very first job in 1979 was typing stock certificates and balancing shareholder records. So you guys may not even know this, but before electronics took over everything, there were stock certificates. So if you were a public company that was trading in the markets, you actually issued physical certificates for your stock. And so companies, if you owned 100 shares of IBM, you would get a certificate that said, here's your 100 shares of IBM. So my job at that time was people would mail in their certificates. I would stamp them, cancel them, like if you wanted to sell some, reissue them, and it was all, it was really all manual. So it was before DTC. And from the very first time I had that job, which I thought was awful, I decided, you know what, it really doesn't matter what I do. My goal in life is to honor God in everything I do. And so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to work really hard, I'm going to solve problems, and I'm going to help people. And lo and behold, by taking that approach, within 6 months, I got a promotion. Then I got to do fee collections. But I just thought, you know what? With that as my goal, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to solve problems and help people. I just kept doing that. And within about 2 years, I actually had been promoted to the head of the department. Ultimately, I got recruited by Security Pacific Bank in 1984 to run their operations department for their big investment group. And then by 2001, I was the CEO of an institutional investment subsidiary at Bank of America. And it all goes back to my goal, which was just work really hard, solve problems for people, and try to help them. And so I'm going to back up and tell you a few stories. How many of you guys are familiar with the asset management business, or the investment business, or Wall Street? Yes? Come on, raise your hands, don't be shy. And most of you that are familiar with it would know that it's mostly a male-dominated world, right? And so the fact that I actually had risen to the top pretty quick in a male-dominated world surprised a lot of people. And a lot of the men that I worked with weren't particularly excited about the fact that I am this young female, right? So I had both things going against me. I'm young and I'm female. And in 1987, I was 26 years old, and I was running a pretty big department of Security Pacific Bank in their asset management business. And I'm on a management team with all men. So it's me and 8 men that are not only men, they're at least 20 years older than I am, and a few of them even older than that. And so whenever we would get into a heated debate about something, like there would be discussion, and if I was involved in the debate and really fighting and making the point, the thing they would do is they would go, oh, you know what, I've got to go to the bathroom. So there would be a break. They would all get up, go into the men's room, and finish the conversation. And then they would, I know you guys were looking at me going, oh, and they would come back, and then they would go, okay, here's what we decided, move on, right? And after a few times of doing this, I started to just get really mad because I thought, wait a minute, that's just not right. And so it happened a few more times, and then there was one topic one day that I was really passionate about because it had a lot to do with what I was doing, and so I'm fighting for my position in this. Sure enough, one of the guys says, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom. They get up and they all start to walk out, and I just thought, they are not doing this to me again. So I just walked into the men's room with them, and when we got in there, they're all just going, and I'm talking, right? Because I'm really nervous. So I just keep talking about my issue, and I'm just saying, and once I get in there, in my mind, I'm thinking, now what do I do? And so I just went into the stall, closed the door, and kept talking. And they're all really nervously talking to me, right? And trying to keep the conversation going. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there, I'm looking to see when they all leave, because I'm like, I can't walk out, right, until they're all gone. So ultimately, I leave when they're all gone, but I will tell you, they never did it again. And so it was one of my early lessons on being a female in this very male-dominated world. And so I always had to go back to, okay, I've got to live my life to honor God. And I'm not saying that wasn't honoring, because I actually do believe that at the end of the day, I didn't do anything wrong, and it caused a change in behavior. And so I tried to keep my eyes on that my whole career. Eventually, what I really do believe happened is that I didn't notice anymore. And so I'm going to fast forward to by, let's see, the late 90s, I ended up, now I kind of forget where I was. I just kept getting promoted, let's just put it there. And ultimately, I ended up as CEO of Deutsche Bank's Private Wealth Management Division for North America. So I ran all of their private wealth management in all of North America. Once again, on an all-male management team. And I sat on the bank's executive committee. So every 6 weeks, I had to be in London or Frankfurt for another all-male board. But about every 6 weeks, about every 4 months, so at the end of a quarter, basically they would get together the top 200 executives at Deutsche Bank somewhere in the world. And so, I don't know, this had probably gone on for about 3 years that I would participate in these meetings, which actually I'll have to tell you this side thing, which is funny. They would call these strategic meetings. And basically what would happen is we would get the results for the quarter and talk about what we need to change. And so anybody who tells you that's strategic, I can tell you it's not. That's very tactical, right? That's very short term. But it is the way that our capital market system causes management to think, right? Because of the way earnings dictate what happens with the share price, and they think that's strategic. But anyway, about 2 years into this, going to these meetings overseas, and being with these 200 top leaders in the world from Deutsche Bank, there was a group that was being focused on. And there was a woman who came in to present. She was like I forget what she was, head of strategic planning or something for that particular group in the bank. She got up, she gave her presentation, and then at lunchtime, we all break and you sit around round tables. And it was funny because I could see that she was kind of following me to see where I was going to sit. And so then I sit down, and she sat down next to me, and we introduce ourselves and everything. And she leans over almost like she's whispering to me, and she said, I'm sorry for following you, but I just had to ask you, what is it like to be the only woman in this whole room every time? And I swear this is true. I looked at her and I went, oh my gosh. I never really noticed that I was the only woman in the room. That's what I was telling you guys. I got to the point where I really didn't notice anymore. And I do think that it was one of the things that really helped me in my business, because I didn't notice, I didn't make a big point of it, neither did anybody else. And as you could tell from my first story, I was always forceful enough to make sure that people knew they had to deal with me. And I went in on the strength of my own credentials and my own work ethic and my own belief system. And I never, ever even, people have asked me a lot, like, did you ever feel like you had to compromise your values? And I can honestly say I never, ever did. I never even felt like I was faced with that challenge. And I think part of that is just coming in pretty solid, knowing who you are, what your grounding is. And there's a practice that I adopted probably at the beginning of my career. It may have been 2 or 3 years into my career. But one of the things that I realized is when I would wake up every day and spend time with the Lord and do devotions and really spend time with him, I had a better day. And so it was a practice that I established back then and continued to this day, like through my whole career and to this day. And even as my life got more and more busy and my days got longer, I would just get up earlier. And so even on days when I fly all night, or Marixa, who works with me, is here, she can tell you my alarm often goes off at 2 or 3 in the morning so that I can have my hour time with the Lord and start my day that way. Because again, for me personally, I found that if I don't do that, things don't always go well. So, so now I'm going to back up to 2000, let's see, in the late 90s. Now I'm the CEO of Deutsche Bank's private wealth management division. And I had a very, very great job at Deutsche Bank. I loved it. And I loved what I was doing. I loved the people I worked with. And at the beginning when I took it over, they had just done several acquisitions of other private banks and asset management businesses. So when I took over the role, we were losing $120 million a year. And we had all kinds of regulatory issues and duplication of offices and systems and all these things. So one of the reasons I took the job was because I figured there's nowhere to go but up from here. If you take over a mess, then it's easy to fix it. But after doing that for 6.5 years and commuting to New York from LA, Monday through Friday, for 6.5 years, in April of 2005, I had completely, not me, my management team and I had completely turned around the business. We integrated all the 4 different brands. We actually outsourced a lot of business, and we created a new culture out of the 4 old cultures, which, to be honest, that was the thing that took the most time and energy, was engaging all of the people that worked there to basically get them to want to stay and help build a new brand. Because that's one of the problems that happens when you go through transitions like that, is people forget, like, well, there's real people there that have feelings, that care about where they came from. And so you have to give them tools to help them through that process. And so we spent a lot of money and a lot of time, but we also felt like it was the right thing to do. We took almost 2 years just on the culture piece to help people engage and help them work through all of those issues. And basically, it's really, really, really draining to put that much kind of time and energy and of your personal self into something. So in April of 2005, after, like I said, I'd been commuting to New York for 6.5 years, we got our first quarter results, and we were on target to hit our 25% profit margins. So I took my management team out to the Yale Club for a huge celebration, and everybody's all happy, and it's obviously a great night. And walking back from the Yale Club to my apartment in New York, I had this very defining moment of, okay, Lord, so really, this is it? Like, there has to be more to life than this. Like, I never see my family. I don't have any friends. I've had this tremendous career. I've made lots of money, but yet I still feel kind of empty. And it wasn't because I didn't have a relationship with the Lord. It really was because of what was going on with me. And so I got back to my apartment and I'm on my knees thinking, okay, what do I do? Am I just going through, this letdown because we had this, we made this big progress, or is there something bigger going on with me? And so the next day, I actually took a book with me to read on the plane. I was heading to Florida, and it was a book called Halftime that basically said, it's written by Bob Buford, who's a really strong Christian guy, who went through a similar experience to mine. And in this book, he basically says, think of life as a football game that you play in two halves. And if you think of the middle as halftime, what do you do during halftime of any game, right? You actually look at how you played the first half, and then you make deliberate decisions about playing the second half. And so I'm reading this book going, yeah, this is me. And the whole big thing that he says is, but whatever you do, if you're going through this experience, don't quit your job. Like, you need to work through what is your plan before you give up whatever you're on, whatever plan you're on right now. I got back to New York that night, packed a bag, flew to London, and quit my job. And so I sit down with my boss and I said, and literally it was the next day. So I'm sitting there with my boss and I said, Pierre, a year from now, I don't want to be doing this. And he's going, what? Like, okay, so do you want another job? And I said, no, you don't understand. And of course, I'm telling him about this book. I was like, I read this book, and I want my life to have more meaning. And I'm talking to this Swiss German who I can tell you had no clue what it meant to say, I want to have meaning in my life. And he's telling me, okay, Gloria, you know what it is? You're just really suffering because your family's in LA and you're in New York and you've been commuting and you've done this tremendous job. So how about if you just take a break? And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I need to figure out what it is my life is about. What is my purpose here? And so ultimately, we worked out a deal that I would stay until the end of the year and help him find a replacement and transition. And I think he was secretly hoping that I would actually change my mind, that it was some, mid-month thing that was going on. And ultimately, I left at the end of 2005, and I thought, okay, I'm going to retire, and I probably need to go be a missionary or, work in a church or do something to give back, because that's the only way I can have my life have meaning and I can find purpose. And so I joined a few boards. I started volunteering for some groups, and I actually started leading a Bible study. I joined this thing called the Master's Program, which actually helps you sort of find your purpose. And I started doing all of these things, and I found myself really, really frustrated because every direction I went, I really felt like, it wasn't for me. And so I can't tell you how many times I was just on my knees saying, okay, Lord, then just tell me, what is it that I am supposed to do? And I honestly felt like it was about 2 years that I went through this journey. And I call it my wandering in the desert period, because that's what I felt like I was doing. And I really do feel like the Lord was just helping me, he was teaching me a lesson and helping me understand that it really was about his purpose. It wasn't really about me or what I wanted to do. And one of the messages I got loud and clear, as I would say, okay, Lord, just tell me, right? One of the messages that I was consistently getting reinforced was, Gloria, I'm probably never going to just tell you the plan, because you will start it and then you'll go, okay, I've got it from here. And the Lord really wants us to be dependent on him every day. And so through that time frame, I really felt like I learned to do that. And I wasn't always patient about that. I didn't always do that before. I would say since then, there have been many times now where I've just had to say, okay, Lord, it's in your hands, because there's nothing really I can do about it. I just have to listen to what it is you want me to do. And ultimately, at the end of that time frame, I was finding myself not only frustrated with what was going on in the nonprofit stuff I was involved with, I was also really impatient about things that were happening in the world. I would see all these big problems and say, gosh, if people could only do this or only do that. And so as that was happening, in 2007, I was invited to join the board at RS Investments. It's a big mutual fund company in San Francisco. I'm the chairman of the board now. But back in 2007, when I got invited to join the board, I was so excited. I went to my very first board meeting, and I'm listening to the portfolio managers present and talk about the capital markets and what's going on. And I literally was sitting there like wistfully going, oh, I really miss this business. And I need to find a way to like get back into business. And from that point, it was the coolest thing, because all these people kept popping up in my life, communicating to me things that I didn't know about the first 30 years of my career, where I had really made a difference in their life. Being a woman of faith, especially in a very, very, very visible position. And I was never an evangelist, but I never hid my faith. And so through about a 6-month period, I would have people like email me completely out of the blue that I hadn't talked to in 20 or 30 years, say, you know, I was just thinking about you, and I just felt like this need to tell you what a difference you made in my life. And the really cool thing for me was I felt finally like, wow, Lord, business was my calling. Like that was my purpose, because you allowed me to touch all these people, like through doing something I really loved. And so finally, I really felt like I had the freedom to say, okay, I want to go back and do what I love. I just want to do it differently than I had done it before. Not in terms of my practices day to day, but in terms of the business that I was involved with. And so in 2008, I started Trilinc Global, the company that I run and own now. And the idea when I started it, and I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to be doing, except that I knew I needed to find a way to marry my love for the investment business with my experience and contacts and all the things God had blessed me with something that could do good in the world. And so as I traveled around the world and looked at problems that people were solving or trying to solve, like poverty or clean water for all of these places, or even electricity and power for places, you go, wait a minute, these problems in the world shouldn't exist, right? We in developed countries take all of these things for granted. And if we could find a way to sort of transport some of our systems, and I don't mean technology necessarily, but systems and processes to places where it could be transformative, then we have the power to change the world. And so with that as a basic idea, I participated in the Milken Global Institute in this discussion group on how do you mobilize private capital, so private investor capital, to direct it towards solving some of these problems. Because all of the aid and development and philanthropy in the world isn't going to solve these problems. We actually need to engage businesses. We need to engage like people who actually control the real capital in the world. Less than 5% of any country's investable assets from individuals goes to philanthropy. And so you go, well, what's happening with the other 95%, right? We need to engage the other 95%. So the only way to do that, after doing a lot of research, there were a couple of ahas that we had. One was that investors still have two buckets. They have their philanthropy bucket and they have their investment bucket. And we actually did a study, and we interviewed all these high net worth individuals. 27 of the 28 that I met with actually were strong Christians. And I presented them with some investment opportunities that had both the purpose of doing some kind of business, but then there was a Christian element to it. Most of the business opportunities were spreading the gospel using business. 28 of the 28 people said to me, I would never invest in that. And these were one-on-one individual conversations over a period of about 6 weeks. And every time I was really surprised. And I would go, but why? And they said, look, if I want to do that, then I'm going to use my philanthropic dollars. If I'm going to align something with a purpose that makes me feel good, then it comes out of my philanthropy bucket, basically. If I am going to make an investment and take that kind of risk, well, then I expect market rate investment returns. And what's really interesting is since then, there have been a lot of studies done, at least in the US, amongst US investors and at all levels. It's not just high net worth individuals. And the number one thing that keeps coming back is investors are not willing to give up investment return to do good. And so if you deliver market rate investment returns and do good, they will pick the one that does good over the one that doesn't, which that's a good thing, right? But they don't want to give up investment return to do it. And given my background and experience, I thought, well then, we need to create products that don't force people to make a choice, right? There are going to always be impact investing products that can't deliver market returns, like social venture stuff, the early stage, somebody's got to seed them. But there are lots of products, investment type of products, that can be created that generate both market returns and do good. But you have to put the systems in place to track and report and be transparent about the do good piece, right? And so ultimately at Trilinc, that's what we do. We create funds that generate market returns and prove impact. So the other goal that we had was, I said, look, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to re-engage in any kind of capital markets kind of activity, then I can't do it in a little way. Like, I need to have like big impact, right? And so we decided that we would actually start by launching a retail fund, retail meaning a fund that was available to Main Street US investors. In order to attract capital from non-accredited investors in the US, so the people who are not wealthy, you actually have to register your product with the SEC, with FINRA, and with all 50 states and territories. And so, as you might imagine, that's very expensive and very time consuming. But I had done it before. I had registered products like that in the past. And so we spent a few years doing research and development, putting the whole plan together, ultimately raising a little bit of capital to help get it done. And I always get my years mixed up, 2013, last year in February, our fund went effective. In June of last year, we broke escrow, and in July, we started making our first investments. So we have a fund that is $1.5 billion. It is available to US non-accredited investors at a $2,000 minimum. So just about anybody can invest in it. And basically, this fund make loans to middle market companies, so small and mid-sized businesses in very select developing economies. So if you think about the US and what our trajectory was over the last 100+ years, we weren't always a developed economy, right? We got there by growing our middle class. And so the key to growing a middle class is small and mid-sized businesses. I don't know if you guys know the statistics or if you've studied it, but in the developed world, 70% of the new job growth comes from middle market companies, small businesses. 67% of our total GDP in the US comes from small and mid-sized businesses. That's what fuels the economy, right? And if you think about it, you go, right, it's the ones who create jobs. It's the people who generate additional taxes that then go back into creating infrastructure, roads and schools and all of those things. And it is typically those small and middle-sized business owners who really care about their community. And so if you look at the whole world, there's about a little over 200 countries in the world. The World Bank basically breaks them down into low-income countries, middle-income countries, and high-income countries. Obviously, United States is a high-income country. An example of a low-income country would be Haiti, right, or Burma. In the middle-income countries, they're countries that actually have started to democratize their infrastructure and their systems. They typically have stable, relatively stable governments. They have legal systems that allow you to do things like perfect liens and have property rights that can be protected. They have free flow of access, so foreign investors can make investments. So basically, when we make investments, we started with the whole, all of the countries. Then we said, okay, we're going to limit it to the middle income countries as defined by the World Bank. And then our investment team actually puts another screen on top of that and looks for the ones that are the most stable, that have the best access, that are growing. Because those are the countries that have the best opportunity to become developed. And so if you look at that particular group of countries, it's about 30 countries that we would invest in. And those countries are much like we were 50 years ago, and sadly, like we might be again right now, where small and mid-sized businesses can't access capital to grow their businesses. And so in the US today, any of you know a small business owner that wants to get money? They can't, right? It's tough even in the United States to get money to grow your business, despite all the evidence that says these are the people that drive the economy. Well, in the developing world, it's magnified, right? There is a $1.3 trillion gap in financing for these kinds of businesses. And so basically, we make loans. First of all, we've identified the countries. We identify managers who are on the ground in those countries that have a long-term track record of doing this. And then they source loans for us. So they find us the businesses that are credit worthy, basically, that need growth capital to go to the next level, and that have some intention and ability to create impact. And so basically then we structure market rate loans, and then we require the borrower companies to track and report on their impact. And so we do a bunch of things. So in addition to the investment analysis that we would normally do, we also do an environmental, social, and governance screen and screen out the bad ones. And then we also require them to say, here's my impact objective. So I will give you guys just a couple of examples of companies that we've invested in recently. We have a diaper manufacturer in Peru. It was an ex-Kimberly-Clark executive, so somebody who was high ranking at Kimberly-Clark, and he was American-Peruvian. And about 6 years ago, he was down in Peru, and he realized that one of the biggest problems they had, and mostly in these rural areas in Peru, was infant mortality and in child healthcare issues, all related to unsanitary conditions coming from cloth diapers. And the big problem there is, in most of these places, they can't afford disposable diapers, and they don't have hot water, they don't have washing machines, they don't have ways to sanitize the diapers. And so they have all these health-related issues related to the fact that they have, unsanitary diaper conditions. So being a Kimberly-Clark executive, he said, I'm going to move back here and solve this problem. So he actually set up a manufacturing plant and spent a lot of time in R&D, basically saying, I'm going to manufacture really low-cost disposable diapers so that we can distribute them to all of these rural places. And in 5 years, they've been able to measure that the infant mortality rates have been improving, that the diseases actually have been improving in these areas. And so the amazing thing is he's a profitable company, but he can't get any more financing to grow his business. He wants to open some new plants, add shifts, hire more people, but banks aren't lending anywhere, especially in Peru. And so we made him a loan, and his objectives, he actually selected several impact objectives. So in addition to generating a good return for our investors in the fund, he has agreed to track continued improvement of healthcare in that region. He also has committed to increasing the number of jobs and increasing the taxes that he will pay in order to create more schools and more roads and the infrastructure that they need. And so that's one example. We have really great companies, so I have to think of the other ones. There's a sugar producer in Brazil, and they're based in a really, really, really rural, very poor area, probably one of the poorest areas in Brazil. And they've actually been a company that's been around for a long time. They've got all these really great contracts for producing sugar or ethanol when sugar isn't selling. And so he couldn't attract enough workers because he has he's out in the middle of nowhere. And so about 6 years ago, also, he actually instituted some new programs. So he provides housing for 250 of their employees so that they can actually have houses and they'll show up on time. He provides education for the children of those people. He actually provided a building for the schoolhouse in the local community. And then he also provides scholarships and grants to students who want to go to college. And more recently, he's actually started raising the wages of the workers there and giving them additional skills training so that they don't have to stay there, right? He really wants to build the community and wants people to be able to thrive and move on. And then just so we can move out of South America, we have a retailer in Indonesia. And I don't, how many of you guys know? I get some smiles here. Who knows Indonesia? So you probably know Indonesia is an archipelago, right? It's a bunch of islands. And they're actually a great economy that has the potential to really develop and really grow. And they have the same access to finance issues that a lot of these developing economies have. There is it's called a big box retailer. It's like Sears was in the United States about 60 years ago. So basically they sell big appliances, stoves, refrigerators, things like that. And also in Indonesia, middle-class people can't get financing. So they don't have credit cards. It's not like here where you guys get probably mailed credit cards all the time. There, unless you are in the top 2 income strata, you can't get any kinds of credit. So basically, most of the middle class in Indonesia don't have basic things that we take for granted. They don't have stoves and refrigerators and big appliances. And so this particular company that's been around for 25 years said, look, we want the middle class to be able to afford all of our goods and services that we're bringing here because it improves their livelihood as well. So they started a store credit program about 18 months ago, and basically, like Sears, said, if you want to buy an appliance here, we will give you credit based on credit scores and things like that. And they've had a very successful program, but they couldn't get any kind of bank to lend to them to expand their store credit program to all of their stores in all the islands. And so we actually made them a loan so that they could expand that program. And they've agreed to not only, again, attractive interest rates for our investors, and a good collateral package so we know we're secure. But they've also agreed to track and report on the number of middle-class consumers, so this underserved population that now will have access to finance that didn't before. So for all of our investments, we then do a profile of the company, and then every quarter we actually report on it, and every year we do an assessment to say, did you make progress towards that impact? And then we report that out to all of our investors. And I will say the responses we get when people hear about the companies we've invested in it's just amazing. I mean, people do actually like to help people. Now, we also do deliver market returns. So the fund, I think I said, pays a 7% yield on an annual basis. And right now, for a fixed income product, paying 7% with a really low duration, there's not a lot of options. But we happen to be one that, delivers a return and does good. So. Anyway, suffice it to say, things are going really well, and we're in development with a couple of other products. And I haven't changed my practice of spending my hour with the Lord every morning and saying, okay, what do I do today? So I'll stop there and answer any questions or divert to anything you guys want to talk about. No one? Okay. Sure. We hired a consultant, even though I take all the credit for it. We hired a consultant who actually, had some really cool change management tools that we employed. And there were, I'll tell you a few of the things that I looked back and said, these were the things that really made the biggest difference. The key overriding theme in all of this was engaging the people there in the change management process. And so the very first thing we did, we basically, as a management team, said, this is where we are today, and projecting this out 3 to 5 years, this is where we will end up if we don't do something. And everybody could see, like, that was a bad thing, right? So if we don't do something, then we end up in a bad place. And we had to sort of make the argument for everybody. Even though you'd think like people would already get that, they really couldn't. So we put it into dollars and cents, but also into visuals for them. And then we went on a roadshow, and we went to every office, and we sat down with people, and we laid out, this is our change management. It was, I forget what we called it now. It was our, like, the case for change. So this was why we have to do it, right? And we didn't say what we're doing. We just said, look, this is why we have to do it. And we got through we had thousands of employees. We had 28 offices. We got through all of the offices in just a few weeks. I mean, it was a pretty rigorous schedule because we had to get everybody on the same page. And as soon as we got everybody like up to speed on the case for change, then we said, okay, now we're going to engage you in how we're going to change. There are certain things that we've already decided that we're going to do that don't really affect you anyway. They're back office things. We need to outsource certain activities. We need to consolidate offices. We need to get rid of all these legal entities. So we laid out the things that we were going to do. But we said, look, there's two things that we can't do alone that we need all of you to help us with. And one of them is re-engineering all of the processes. So we have 4 different companies that we're integrating, 28 different offices that do things differently. And we said, look, we can't do that, right? And we have 4, well, actually, I'm going to come to that because that was the second thing. So what we need to do is we need to say, first you have to map out what everybody does today, and then together we're going to map out what it should look like. And so we took an office, a conference room in New York in our headquarters office. There was a conference room that was about as big as this, and it was a facilitated process, but it was called a white paper process. They covered all of the walls in white paper, and it was very scheduled. We had it so that it started with the very first process of before somebody becomes a client. There are things you do, right? Putting them in your CRM system, doing follow-ups, inviting them to events. There's activities that are these segments. And so we went through each one, and we invited people in from all over the country. It took us almost 18 months to map out what is, right? And we did it. People could come in after we did the basic mapping, then people could come in and add to it. Again, this was a facilitated process. And basically there were little color codes for, this is a duplicate process. There were strings that said this goes to here. But at the end, we had all of our processes end to end. Every single activity where we touched a client was mapped out in this room. And then once that was done, we invited people back in to sort of see how it was. And then we said, okay, now we are going to re-engineer this entire process. We're going to take it step by step, and we are going to say, so if there's 5 different ways to do something, we need 1, right? And so help us engineer what that's going to look like. And we did the same process. It took a little less time. It took about 9 months for people coming in, day by day, hour by hour, and working on what the new process would be. But when we were done, it was easy then to say, okay, here's all of your new processes, right? Because they designed them. And so we had such buy-in by the time we changed everything that it didn't feel like change to people, right? And we took the time to actually let them get it done. And then the second big piece of that was the culture piece. So the 4 companies that Deutsche Bank had acquired were 4 very, very, very different cultures. One was a really aggressive broker-dealer culture. One was a really old-line trust culture. One was a New York-based Harvard, Yale business school, we're smarter than everybody culture. One was a international credit-focused private wealth management culture that was very international in its culture. And so blending those 4 cultures and saying we have to come up with a new brand. Like, we can't have 4 names. We can't market ourselves as 4 different firms, right? So what we have to do is we have to pick the best out of each of the 4 cultures and create a new culture. And so our consultant also facilitated a process where we went to every office and we went through this process of identifying what do you think are the best things in your culture that you want to make sure live on in the new culture. And that took about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months because you worked through it time and time again through a very facilitated process. And then we took people through change management programs. You guys have heard of, like, there's all these team building programs where you go off in the mountains and you learn to trust each other. There are things that you can do in big groups or small groups that are inside an office as well, that are really specifically designed to make people aware of, behaviors and habits that you acquire in business. And then once you make people aware of them, then you can start changing them. And one that I will tell you because I thought it was so funny, they had this game, it was called the red-black game. And the whole thing was designed to make people realize how much or how often, in the absence of information, people make stuff up, right? And you don't really think about it, but if you are observing something that's going on and you don't really know what's going on, your mind starts making things up about what it might be, right? And that happens in business all the time. So this red-black game was designed to make people realize that they actually make stuff up, right? And that they've made stuff up about each other, and then break down the barriers and give you tools and techniques to say, if you don't know, then ask somebody, right? And so the game, I won't go through it, but it actually was a really cool game. And our consultant, basically, at the end of every time we would play this game, would say, okay, so I've just proven that you all have degrees from MSU. And everybody would go, huh? And he would go, making shit up. and the funny thing was, it really stuck with people, and it was something that would remind them, right? Like whenever they were in a situation, they would go, oh, wait a minute, I don't really know that that's true, so I better ask somebody. And I would say that particular, again, facilitated game, it had a huge impact on our ability to get people engaged and change their minds, and want to be part of it. And then at the end of all of it, I forgot, at the very beginning, when we rolled out that, here's why we have to change, and we're going to involve you in the process, the other thing that we told them, and that our consultant said was going to be really important, and I really do believe it mattered, was telling them if they didn't like the way we've changed by the end, they could always opt out, and we would give them a severance package. And so if you think about it, you go, wow. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? There's no risk to you, right? Stick it out. Don't leave before you can get this severance package, because it's going to be your choice not to be here at the end. So the one thing that clearly did was it freed people up. It opened their mind to say, why not engage, right? I got nothing to lose. And the other thing it did was it kept people there that might have otherwise left too soon, because they just didn't want to deal with it. And so I think that was a fantastic thing that they told us to do. At the end, we did give everybody that option, and we lost very few people. We did lose a few people, but not very many. I mean, there was only a few people that put their hands up and said, yeah, I just don't want to be part of this. Most of those people were people that were near retirement anyway, and just said, I just don't have the energy to learn a new thing. So.
Oh, thanks for sharing. What you were just describing sounds totally awesome. And so I was wondering, it sounds like you're doing a lot of good with people and making a lot of changes and helping actual people grow more than just making money, but you still felt unfulfilled.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that, because usually I feel like in business, if you're helping people, you'll be fulfilled. You felt a call to do something else.
Yeah, it's actually a great question, and it was really good of you to pick up on that. And in fact, Al Arisman, the person who brought me to the event where Lorena and I met, he said, whenever you're speaking, especially to colleges, and whether it's undergraduate or graduate, like you need to actually address that issue and explain to them that you can actually make a difference and you did make a difference in what you were doing. You don't actually have to have a half-time experience. And so I'm glad you asked that because I forgot to explain. Being born and raised in the Midwest, and I actually found the Lord when I was quite young. I was raised in a Christian home, went to church all the time, and especially in the 60s and 70s, I really did believe, and I do think it came from a lot of churches, although I think that's changing. I really did believe that the only way you could serve the Lord was if you were either in the missionary field or if you were, a preacher or something doing some kind of evangelism. And otherwise, then you weren't really serving God. And it was through my 2-year journey that I realized that no, business can be a calling. And for a lot of people it is. And for me, it clearly was. And looking back on it, it was like, I loved what I did. I mean, I really loved it. And so, at the time, I knew that I was helping people, and I think that was what helped me stay fulfilled all that time. But I always had this nagging thing in the back of my mind of, but I'm not really necessarily growing the kingdom in the way that I had been programmed to think you were supposed to do it. And so that is actually a big message that I think our churches need to change and get that message out there. And I don't know exactly how. I've talked to our own pastor about you need to actually do a little more outreach to people in business, right? Because if a lot of churches you go in there and they'll talk about things that I can't relate to, and I go, well, wait a minute. Why don't you talk about the experiences that I have in my life, the challenges I find as a business leader? And fortunately, there's now lots of other places that are sort of popping up that you can go to get that support. But we need to make sure our churches actually are delivering that message and saying to people like you guys who are, looking at perhaps business as a calling and saying, okay, you need support too. And it just came from the mindset that I grew up in, that I felt like I wasn't good enough or whatever. Yeah.
You mentioned how your crisis in Europe or that time in New York, and how you're willing to see out on your family and whatnot. And then,
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you could speak on how it's changed since you created this other company.
Yes, I'm also glad you asked that. Lorraine actually asked me to talk about that, and I forgot. And I'm going to answer your question, I promise, but I want to tell you another little story. So when I was working on Wall Street and traveling to New York all that time, I kept being asked by this group called Women on Wall Street to come and talk, give a talk to the women who are part of this organization. And I actually knew the woman really well who was running the organization, who was always asking me, come. And I really didn't have time. I mean, I was so busy. And so I kept putting her off. And at the very end, when she knew I was retiring and everything, she said, you have no more excuses. Now you have to come talk to this group. And so I thought, okay. I just don't know what I will say to people. I don't know what to tell them. So I sat down and I prayed about it, and I came up with, I now forget what it was, 10 things that I felt like practices that made me successful in my career. And I give my little talk, however long it was, and then at the very end, and it's this room filled with several hundred of these very young, eager Wall Street women, and at the very end, it's questions, and the first girl up, she raises her hand and she says to me, so if you had just one piece of advice for me, what would it be to have, this great, successful Wall Street career? And without hesitating, I said, find a really great husband. And all these women, they're just looking at me like, what? And I said, look, I really do believe that the reason I was able to have the career I had and was so successful was because I had a really great husband at home who loved me no matter what, who was with me through all of this. And my husband actually is a Mr. Mom. He stays at home. We have a son who has Down syndrome, who is now going to be 28 in a couple months. And when our son was born, obviously my career was already pretty much taken off by then. My husband was working for World Vision, and it was one of those like really weird, awkward moments where we learned that he had Down syndrome, which we didn't really know what it was. You know, like the doctors told us, and we're like, okay. It wasn't as known back then as it is now. I mean, there were a lot of Down's kids, but they usually got institutionalized, so people didn't know, you know, they weren't as familiar as they are today. And so basically we looked at each other and, you know, we said, wow, that probably means one of us needs to stay home. Because my husband's from Indiana, I'm from Ohio, our family's all back there. And, you know, and I'm sitting there going, oh. And my husband said, you know, and I'd really like to. And I went, oh, phew. I said, because I just don't think I could. I mean, I just, you know, I learned my lesson when I was younger, and I love my son, he's amazing. And I love spending time with him, but I thought, I don't think I could do that. I mean, I really don't think I could be a stay-at-home mom. And my husband is amazing. I mean, Marixa can tell you, he's just a truly amazing guy. He's always supported me. He's, you know, pretty much raised our son. And even in the time, I have to tell you this story too, when I was traveling to New York for 6.5 years, I would get on a red-eye Sunday night, and I would get home on Friday night. So I would take a 4 o'clock flight, get back about 9 o'clock, and then I would just be here for the weekend and do it again. And basically, this is how out of balance my life was then. When I decided to fly to London and quit my job, it didn't occur to me until after I had done it to tell my husband. And so when I realized, I walk out of my boss's office and I'm thinking, uh-oh. And I was going through, you know, how you go through those mental things of, okay, do I pretend like I'm just thinking about it and not tell him, you know? And I just thought, well, I just can't do that. So, you know, with great trepidation, I can tell you, I called my husband and I'm like, hi, honey, I'm in London. And he was like, oh, I didn't know you were going to London this week. And I said, well, I wasn't. But I had this like epiphany. And this morning I quit my job. And his response was, oh, thank God. And I was just like, oh, goodness. And, you know, it was one of those things where it was clearly, he will tell you, it was really hard for him to have me gone all that time. And I know it put a strain on, you know, everything, but we both were very committed to the relationship, and I understood what he was sacrificing to let me do what I was doing. And so to the extent that I could, when I was home, I would try to be really present and be there. I know I didn't always do a good job. But the one thing I really did give up was friends. And so, because I didn't have time, right? When I would get home on Friday night, I really needed to spend time with my family. And later, when I retired, the one thing I prayed for was, I was like, okay, Lord, give me some really great women friends that are Christians, because I feel like I need that in my life. And I got an abundance of them, so I feel really blessed. And unfortunately, I'm actually back to a place now in my life where I don't have as much time, so I haven't been as good of a friend. I have a little more balance than I had before. The biggest difference is that my office is in Manhattan Beach, about a mile from my office, or whatever. My house is a mile from my office. And I really work hard to, you know, even more so to really try to be present and try to be home more. And but one of the things that I decided long ago, like, I don't think there is such a thing as having balance. I think if you're a driven person who really, you know, feels called to do what you're doing and you love what you're doing, you have to make choices. And I've made choices, and I actually feel really good about the choices I've made. So hope that answers the question, yeah.
You actually triggered something that I was curious about with at the time. And, you know, being in college, our schedules can fluctuate, super busy, not as busy. And I wanted to know, how do you weigh, like, the importance of how you spend your time between all the different responsibilities that you have?
That is a great question. I probably should be more thoughtful about it than I am. as I said, the one thing that I know that I always make time for is spending time with the Lord in the morning. And I would say in the last couple of years, I've tried to also say, okay, I've got to make sure there's enough time, enough things I do with my family. And so sometimes it's a trade-off between doing something at work or doing a family thing. And I probably go through a mental calculation to say, okay, I did 2 work things. I can do 2, and try to keep that a little more balanced. But in a day, one thing that I know is a really good discipline, and I probably do it about half the time, is like at the end of my prayer time in the morning, I'll look at my calendar for the day and go, okay, what are all the things I have to get done? How does that fit? And then make choices about that. But Rix is here, so I can't even lie to you to tell you that I'm really good about making choices all the time, and balancing things. And they're constantly having to say to me, okay, Gloria, like, think about it. Like, can you really do this and do this? Or is this the way you should be spending your time, given everything that's going on? So I do have good people in my life who try to help keep me focused and making better decisions, because I think it's a hard thing. I honestly do think the best thing to do is to literally look at each day and just understand what's in that day and what are the things you want to have accomplished. Do you guys, it's probably before your era, but do any of you guys know who Zig Ziglar is? Some of you, good. So Zig Ziglar is a motivational speaker from Texas. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he's an amazing, motivational speaker, and also a very strong Christian. And for years, and even still, I will, I was going to say pop in a tape, but I don't do that. But back when I started listening to him, you actually got all of his series on tapes. And he would give you practical things to do. One of the biggest things that he always says is, be really specific about your goals and have goals, sort of high-level goals in every area of your life. And then make sure that what you're doing and your activity is aligned with those goals. And so he has this whole process of a performance planning process, so that every day you actually think about what you're doing in that day and how does it work towards achieving those goals. And even if you don't plan out your day, like hour by hour, whatever, task by task, at least you're thinking about it in the context of what do you want to accomplish, right? Always keeping the end in mind of what are the outcomes that you want. So there's I'm going to talk to him about POP, just because I think it's a really good practice. So this is a real practical tip for you. There's a process, this same consultant that I had in New York that helped me with Deutsche Bank, one of the processes that he taught us was something called POP, P-O-P, Purpose, Outcomes, Process. And I say it's really simple. Marissa will say it's really not as simple, but it is simple. But if you think about, if you're going into a meeting, or you're going to hold a meeting or have a conversation, be really clear about what is the purpose of that conversation, and be more clear about what are the outcomes that you're looking for. So it's the purpose, the outcomes. Once you know what those outcomes are, then you can design the process to get there. And it's similar to goal setting, right? Once you know what outcome you want, then you design everything in between to get those outcomes. And I can tell you, for meetings, it really helps you focus meetings. You guys probably have been in meetings in other things you're involved in, and there's nothing more frustrating than a meeting that isn't focused, right? Because you're all sitting there, and sometimes it's fun to have the conversation and talk, and then everybody starts looking at their watch like, are we going to accomplish anything? Why are we here? And so if you make that really clear as the leader of the meeting, or even if you're not the leader, force somebody else to say, okay, I'll come, but what's the purpose and what are the outcomes that we want? It will really help guide the conversation. Anything else? Yeah.
I keep thinking of all these different questions, but I guess one would be, what has been one of the best ways you found motivates your teams? Have you found one overarching thing that is really motivating, or how do you get people to become engaged and buy into your vision and stuff?
Marissa could probably answer that better than I can. What are some things?
So one of the main things is Gloria always finds time for everyone to make you feel
not her employee. So,
Yeah.
like, them.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually do think that's it. Like really, it gets back to even what we did at Deutsche Bank, like engaging people. It was easy for me because I really, truly, like everybody that I work with, I go, wow, we all come to the table with different skills, right? And different experiences. And so just like in the Bible, we always talk about how, the church is one body, right? And it takes all of the parts of a body to work effectively. That's true in business too. So I look at everybody that I work with as they come to the table with really unique experiences and different backgrounds, and they play a role that's critical to the success of our whole company. And so they're just as important as everybody else in the company. And it reminds me, when you were saying that, it reminds me, when I went to work at Scudder, I had a boss who, it was the funniest conversation I've ever been in. After, I don't know, I'd been there about 6 months, and he sat me down and he's like, so, Gloria, I always hear from everybody who works for you how much they really enjoy working for you. And so I want to know what it is. Like, what is your secret? Like, why do people like working with you? And I mean, honestly, I was sitting there, I was going, I don't know. I mean, like, and I said, so the thing I thought of was, I was like, well, you know what I think it is? I think it's because I really care about people. And he kind of sits back in his chair and he goes, so how do they know you care about them? And I was like, and I was sitting there going, I don't know. And he kept pressing me like, well, so what do you do, right? Because he's now trying to figure out what can he do. And the only thing I could think of was, I was like, well, if they come to my house, I cook for them. And it was really funny because then much later, like as I had time to think about it and process it, I actually talked to him about like how you think about people and honestly caring about them and their success. And I think it shows. If you really do care about people and you care about them and what's going on with them, it matters. I mean, I think it probably is the most motivating thing. And I think that's something that you have to actually care about people. You know what I mean? I don't think that's like a thing that you can just pretend. But if you do enough looking at what successful companies do, or in fact, Zig Ziglar, one of the other things he says is you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. And so if you think about that in any situation, right? I look at it with, I had a sales team of about, I don't know, probably 100 people back at Security Pacific Bank, and it was one of the times I was really like getting that message, and I thought, you know what, that's true. Because if every single one of those salespeople hits their goals, and I help them do that, right, then I'm going to be successful. I don't even have to do anything to be successful. I just have to help them be successful at what they're doing. And so I went to all of them. These were really experienced salespeople. I was pretty young then. And so I went to all of them and said, so my job is to help you be really successful. So you tell me, like, what are the obstacles for you to being successful? Because I need you to succeed. And it was, now I think, what's the term they call it? What's that called? Management, servant leadership or something like that. And I think that's really what it's about. I mean, and one of the things that I've learned, probably more so in the last 10 years, is, those 10 things I told you that I told the women on Wall Street, like these are the things that I did that made me successful. They were all sort of like practical things about how you treat people, about keeping your values, never compromising. But it was funny, about maybe about 10 years ago is when it started, and about 5 or 6 years ago, it hit me. I was like, wow, every single one of those things are principles in the Bible. Like, there are things about how you treat people, about the what you dwell on, right? You read scriptures about, dwell on things that are positive and pure, and you go, wow, all of the things that I learned to do in my life and my career, ultimately all were principles in the Bible that were all designed to help us. And I think sometimes we miss those messages because we think of the Bible either as, something was old or something that's in a different story, and it's hard to pull out those little tidbits. But it's really, truly the only book you ever need. Yeah.
Have you ever had a boss that just was difficult to work with and that treated you poorly, and how did you
Yeah.
go through that?
That's also a great question. I have had bad bosses, and I'll give you a story about one of them, but one of my good bosses, one of my great mentors of all times, one of the things he told me was, Gloria, in your life, in career, you are going to have more bad bosses than you are going to have good bosses. And so with every bad boss, you need to find something to learn from them and something to like about them. And then you dwell on that because, again, you're going to have more bad ones than good ones. And so you need to find something that you can learn from even the bad ones. And so I had this boss, and this is actually why he was teaching me this lesson, because I had this boss who was awful. And he was a guy that was really big ego, really full of himself, did have an issue with women. I really was pretty young still then. And I was the head of marketing at the time, and not yet head of sales. I was just head of marketing. And my peers were like the head of the real estate group, the head of the investment group, the head of legal. So it was other heads of businesses, but all who were older than me, more experienced, and of course, all men. And so I worked directly for the CEO, as did all of those people. And I can tell you I worked way harder than all of them. And I produced more results and got us further. And basically, the end of the year came, and it was time for bonuses. And I really thought, I'm going to get a promotion. I'm going to get a big bonus. I mean, I obviously deserve it. And there was discussion about, we'd gotten increased bonus pool and all these things. And so the day comes, and he's giving me my bonus, which was a lot more than I had gotten the year before. But I had also taken on like so much more responsibility, and again, delivered so much more than anybody else. And so I was really, really not just disappointed in my bonus, I was really upset about it. And to him, it was, yes, but it's so much better, right? And I was like, I'm looking at it going, yeah, but wait a minute. Like, this doesn't reflect what I'm worth. And I was so mad about it that I didn't say anything at the time. I just left. Now, I had never missed a day. I had never taken time off. And I just left. And then I didn't come back for like 3 days. I would call in and just say I'm, homesick. And the whole time I was just praying about it, saying, okay, what do I do about this, right? And I was playing out all the scenarios. So if I go in and I, demand that he pay me more, right? All I'm going to do is really make him mad. And ultimately, I'm not going to get what I want. It goes back to the outcome. So what was the outcome that I really wanted? And I thought, well, I'm not going to get him to change this amount. If you know the process in big organizations, there's no way he's going to go back and give me more money, because he'd also would have to admit that he was wrong, right? Which I knew, again, wasn't going to happen. So I could go demand it. I'm not going to get the outcome I want. I could go in and threaten to sue him, right? Because I had all this evidence of times when he was, mistreating me because I was a woman. And I thought, I could win, right? But in the end, then I would be labeled as the woman who, sued for these kinds of things. And I go, I win in the short run, but I don't really win in the long run, because I'll have to leave. I can't stay if I do that. And plus, it'll cost me a lot of money and energy. So then I played through, right, all these scenarios. I could do this, and then would play them all the way through to what's the outcome. Ultimately, what I did was I asked him out to lunch. And so I come back on Monday, and I just walked into his office, and I said, hey, Jim, whenever you get time, I'd really like to spend some time with you and talk, but away from the office. And anytime this week, right? And he's like, no, how about today? How about lunch? And I was like, okay. And I knew, like, it was obvious that he knew that I was upset, even though I hadn't communicated anything. And so I sat down with him at lunch, and I said, Jim, I was really disappointed in my bonus because I know that I deserved more. And I think you know that I deserved more. But I understand the situation that you were in is that I'm in a job that doesn't allow you to pay me what I'm worth. And so basically, I completely understand why you did this, but I don't ever want to be in this position again. And so I need you to help me figure out what job can I go to so that I can be paid what I'm worth. Because clearly, this job doesn't pay that. And so I took it off of him and said, I understand, your hands were tied. And of course, then he was like, yes, my hands were tied, that's it. But the best part was, he said to me, so Gloria, any job that you want in our department is yours. Any job. I'll have somebody leave because I don't want you to leave. And so you go, you think about what job is it you want, and I'll make it happen. And so ultimately I got what I wanted without really even knowing that was what I wanted. And so sometimes it's just step away and look at things from a different perspective and say, what outcome do I want, right? And how do I get that? Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah.
Kind of changing topics, I had a question about the businesses that you overlook in other countries. And I was wondering what the requirements are for these businesses for you, for Trilinc, to invest in them.
So because of the people that we bring in as investors, we know that their risk profile is pretty limited. So they have to invest, like they have to be protected, basically. So we can only invest in companies that actually have a 3-year operating history. So we know that they're a viable business. They have to have cash flow that proves that they can repay the loan. They have to be willing to give us tangible collateral against, whatever the amount is we're loaning them. And they have to be willing to and able to track and report on their impact. They have to have some intention to actually create impact. And then they have to pass these negative screens. So for the negative screens, that actually eliminates a few categories, like few industries. So no tobacco, no firearms, no weapons of mass destruction. So there's a few industries that we won't invest in. But other than that, we will invest in any business that has those characteristics that then also passes the due diligence of our sub-advisors. So our sub-advisors, who are the people that are on the ground, who know the community, know the country, they actually go in and do the analysis on the company, just like you would with any investment. And as long as they pass those, then it could be any kind of company. Anything else? Yeah.
I guess one question would be, what can we be doing now to prepare ourselves to be more marketable in the business world once we get out of college or even years down the road? What should we be actually doing now?
The best advice I can give you is to try to get actual experience in the business world. So if you have internship opportunities, really take those opportunities. And most people coming out of college, actually, even though they say they have a pretty clear career path, they may have a category, but they don't really even know all of the individual jobs within a category to know, I'm going to like doing this and not like doing this, or my strengths will fit really well here and not here. And so I would say when you have any of those experiences or opportunities, even if it's a short-term internship, get as many as you can that are diverse so that you can get more clear on, one, what you like to do, where your skills are really aligned with that, and be really take the time to understand yourself. Understand if somebody asks you, what are your strengths or what are your skills, know those answers, and really know them, right? And know them from experience. Even if it's leading a club or leading a group or, again, taking an internship to do things or doing a volunteer thing. Have enough of those experiences that you can articulate that really well. Nobody expects you to say, I want this job doing exactly this, but they do want you to be pretty clear about yourself, right? Who you are and where you can contribute and what's important to you.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.